Hello my dear students, welcome you back again. In previous lecture we have studied PLSQL procedure and function. Now in this video we are going to discuss 4.7. So 4.7 is very important and it's related to database triggers. So after watching this video, student can easily able to explain what is a database trigger, what is the use of database trigger, how to create a trigger and how to delete a trigger, and different types of triggers. Okay, basically we are focusing on syntax, how that triggers are created. Okay, so these are the four important points which can be objective of this video lecture. So first question, what is a database trigger? So trigger is a stored program. Okay, it is a program which is stored. It is similar to your procedure and function which is stored programming, but triggers are automatically executed or fired when some event occur. Okay, सिंपल आहे. ट्रिगर हा एक सब प्रोग्रामच आहे, तो फंक्शन अँड प्रोसिजर सारखा आहे, पण फंक्शन अँड प्रोसिजर कॉल करावी लागते यूजिंग द नेम, बट ट्रिगर इज ऑटोमॅटिकली कॉल्ड और ऑटोमॅटिकली फायर्ड व्हेन सर्टन इव्हेंट ऑकर. बरोबर, ह्यासाठी तुम्हाला मी एक्झाम्पल देतो म्हणजे तुम्हाला ट्रिगर करेल. ज्यावेळी तुम्ही तुमच्या ATM मधून तुमच्या अकाउंटमधून एखादी अमाऊंट विड्रॉ करता, त्यानंतर ऑटोमॅटिकली तुम्हाला एक मेसेज येतो. ओके, विड्रॉ झाल्यानंतर एखादी ॲक्टिव्हिटी एखादी ट्रान्झॅक्शन झाल्यानंतर तुमच्या मोबाईलवर SMS येणं ह्याला म्हणतात ट्रिगर, कारण की तो इव्हेंट ऑकर झाल्यानंतर SMS थ्रो होतो, फायर होतो. ओके, सो दॅट इज अ डेटाबेस ट्रिगर. ड्यू टू द एनी इव्हेंट ऑकर द सब प्रोग्रामिंग इज executed, that is called as a trigger execution. The triggers are written by the programmer to execute after certain event occur. These events are data manipulation, DML statement like delete, insert and update, or DDL statement like a create, alter and drop. And last, triggers are executed or triggers are fired after database operations like a server error, logs, log off, login, startup or shutdown. Okay, so these are the basically three events due to that triggers are fired. Generally triggers are subprogram. It is similar to your procedure and function, but it is automatically called after any certain event occur. So I have already given you an example. In banking system, when you withdraw or when you deposit any amount in your account, there will be automatically SMS generated. So that is SMS generation program is a trigger after the any updation of your account. Okay, so that is a trigger. So what is the basic use of trigger? This question is asked multiple times. What is the use of trigger? So trigger are stored programs which is automatically fired or executed when certain events are occurred. Generally triggers are used to generate some desired column values automatically. So these are generally written to generate some column value automatically. Then second, it enforces the referential integrity. To check or to enforce the referential integrity, triggers are called. Basic example, when you withdrawing amount more than your balance, then it automatically send you SMS or send you a message the balance is not sufficient in your account. So that is enforcing the referential integrity. Next, event logs, storing information on the table axis. So using the trigger you can have information which user has login or which user has a change the database. Then Triggers are generally used for auditing, means which user, which event performing which activities. Next use of trigger is synchronous replications of tables can be achieved using the trigger. So due to the single trigger, there will be multiple tables can be modified or reflected having the changes, okay, using the trigger. Next advantage, triggers are used to impose a security and authentication to your database. Last, triggers are used to prevent unvalidated or unauthorized transactions. Okay, so when any user log into your database without username and password, or password is wrong, then automatically there will be message or there will be a window appears that password is not correct. So that will be the outcome of your trigger. Okay, so these are the basically 7 uses of the trigger. Due to the trigger, we can add automatic value to the columns, we can force a referential integrity, we can store the login and activity information. Triggers are generally useful for the auditing purpose. Using the trigger, we can replicate this same table multiple times. It is import a security on the database and it avoids unauthorized access to the database. So these are the benefits and uses of the trigger. Now a very important question, how to create a trigger. So this question is asked multiple times in your MSBT question paper. Syntax is very important. Okay, so how to create a trigger? So for creating trigger, you must have a create or a replace, then keyword trigger, then you must have a trigger name, then before or after or instead of. These are the 3 keywords. So this will indicate when that trigger will occur. Then operation, insert, update or delete, on column, on table name, referencing old values and new value for each row, when a condition, then declaration part of trigger, then begin section where the trigger executable program or statements are stored. Then trigger may have an exception and end. So this is overall syntax of trigger. It is similar to your procedure or function. So declaration, begin, exception part and end is similar, but in starting create trigger name, then when that trigger will be fired, before, after or instead of, then which activities are causing the trigger, insert, update or delete, on which column, on which row, on which referential constraint, for which row, when condition is satisfied. Okay, so this is a trigger and this is a syntax of trigger. So in syntax, create trigger is a keyword, then you must have a specific trigger name, then when that trigger will be executed, before, after or instead of, then which operation, insert, update or delete, which will be specified the DML operation, then op column, which specifies the which column is going to update, on table, which table is associated with the trigger, referencing old O and new as N. This will allow you to refer new and old values or various DML statements such as insert, update and delete. For each row will specify row level trigger which modify a row in the table after the execution of a trigger. When and condition, it will be the condition for a row which trigger would be or will be going to fire. So that condition is satisfied, then trigger will be fired. Okay, जर बॅलन्स 500च्या खाली आला तर SMS जाईल लो बॅलन्स किंवा यू मस्ट हॅव मिनिमम बॅलन्स. सो दॅट इज अ कंडिशन पण चेक करतो ट्रिगरच्या एक्झिक्युशनच्या वेळी. ओके, सो दॅट इज अ ट्रिगर क्रिएशन सिंटॅक्स. So that is an example of a trigger. So create or replace trigger, display salary changes, before, delete or insert or update on customers for each row. So customers is a table. For each row, when new.id is greater than 0, declaration salary cell underscore different number begin cell underscore different number is equal to new salary minus old salary. Okay, if there will be any change in the salary, that will be displayed. So that is a trigger written. Okay, so it will be fired after the changes in the database. So that is a basic example of trigger. In practical, we are going to implement a trigger. So there is no bother about the syntax. We can have a practical demonstration of this trigger. How to delete a trigger? To delete a trigger, you must have a drop trigger and trigger name that will easily delete a trigger. Okay, so that is the example. Drop trigger, displays salary changes. Okay, semicolon will delete a trigger. So it is very simple to delete a trigger. My dear students, up till now you have seen what is a trigger, what is the use of trigger, and what is the syntax of trigger. So reflection spot question: explain the syntax of creating a trigger. Write down your answer on your notebook. Stop this video, take your time, write down your answer. Yes, my dear students, that will be your answer. Create or replace trigger, trigger name, before, after or instead of, then operation, insert or update or delete, on column, on table, referencing old values, new values for each column, then when, condition, then trigger body, declaration part, begin part, exception part, and end. So that is a syntax of a trigger. That will give you 4 marks. You can write down the definition of trigger first, then write down the syntax, explain the syntax. Okay, with appropriate information regarding the create, before, after, begin, declaration session, execution session. Okay, so that will give you 4 marks in the MSBT question paper. Now next question: different types of triggers. My dear students, triggers are stored procedure which are automatically called or automatically executed after the any DML, DDL or any database activity. Basically there are 3 types of triggers: level trigger, event trigger, and timing trigger. Level trigger has basically 2 different types: row level trigger and statement level trigger. It is very easy. Row level trigger means when trigger will affect a single row in the database, that will be called as a row level trigger. एखाद्या ट्रिगर मुळे जर एखादी रो इन्फेक्ट होत असेल तर त्या ट्रिगरला रो लेवल ट्रिगर म्हणतात. आफ्टर द फायरिंग दिस ट्रिगर, एव्हरी रेकॉर्ड दॅट गॉट इफेक्टेड बाय द DML statement like insert, update, delete, it always used for each row. Okay, एखाद्या डिलीट ऑपरेशन नंतर, इन्सर्ट अपडेट नंतर किंवा डिलीट अपडेट ऑपरेशन नंतर डेटाबेसमध्ये जो चेंज होतो तो एका रोवर होतो. फॉर ईच रो जर एखादा ट्रिगर इफेक्ट करत असेल तर त्याला रो लेवल ट्रिगर म्हणतात. ओके, देन सेकंड इज स्टेटमेंट लेवल ट्रिगर. स्टेटमेंट लेवल ट्रिगर फायर्स वन्स फॉर ईच स्टेटमेंट. ओके, एक स्टेटमेंट एक्झिक्यूट झाल्यानंतर जर ट्रिगर एक्झिक्यूट होत असेल त्याला स्टेटमेंट लेवल ट्रिगर म्हणतात. स्टेटमेंट मीन्स डेटाबेस स्टेटमेंट. statement level trigger, it will fire for each statement which is going to execute. Okay, row level trigger मध्ये ट्रिगर एक्झिक्यूट झाल्यानंतर सिंगल रो इफेक्ट करतो. जर एखादा रो इफेक्ट होत असेल तर तो ट्रिगर फायर होतो. इथं आफ्टर एव्हरी इंडिव्हिज्युअल स्टेटमेंट a trigger will be fired. So that is the basic difference between row level trigger and statement level trigger. Row level हा each row ला असतो. Statement level trigger, it is a group of rows may be affected at a time. So that is a row level trigger and statement level trigger. Next, event triggers. Okay, basically event trigger has three types. So there are three types of event which causes a trigger. So DDL event trigger, so event which will be fired or executed after a DDL statement like a create, alter, drop and truncate. So that triggers are called as a DDL level trigger. Second, DML level triggers, the triggers which is executed or fired after DML statement like insert, update and delete are called as DML event triggers. And last, database event triggers, the triggers which are fired or executed after login, log off, shutdown, server error. This type of triggers are called as a database event triggers. Then third type of trigger, a timing trigger. Timing trigger is the trigger is executed or fired depending upon the timing. Okay, timing of that event. Okay, when the trigger will be fired. Okay, basically there are two types, before and after. So before trigger will be executed or fired before the executing the DML statement. The trigger statement may be executed before a specific condition. After means after trigger is fired after the execution of certain DML statement. Okay, so that are two types. Before means before the DML statement, after means after the DML statement. So it is a before and after. So when the DML statement is going to execute, when the triggers are going to execute, before the DML statements or after the DML statements. So these are the two types of before trigger and after trigger. So this is an example of timing trigger. So create or replace trigger. Trigger name is check age. So it will be executed before insert or update on the table student for each row. Begin if age is greater than 30, then there will be error, that will be age should not be greater than 30. And if end. तो हा आपण एक ट्रिगर लिहिलेला आहे. ज्यावेळी एखादा युजर डेटाबेसमध्ये एंट्री करतो, जर तो एंट्री करताना ज्यावेळी एज मोर दॅन 30 टाकेल, म्हणजे DML स्टेटमेंट एक्झिक्यूट व्हायच्या पूर्वीच चेक होईल, म्हणजे डेटाबेसमध्ये अपडेट होण्याच्या पूर्वीच चेक होईल की मोर दॅन 30 असेल तर मेसेज जाईल की एज शुड बी लेस दॅन 30. सो दॅट इज अ बिफोर ट्रिगर. Okay, before inserting or updating database, triggers check that age and it will display the age must be less than 30. Okay, or age must be not greater than 30. Okay, so that is a type of trigger which is useful for timing before. So this is a very important point. And there are basically 2 to 3 questions are asked in your MSBT question paper. So what is a trigger and what is the use of trigger? Then syntax of create trigger and delete trigger, and last types of trigger in which before, after or row level or statement level triggers are asked. So this is a very simple topic. Practically we can going to demonstrate a trigger. In MSBT question paper, at least there are 2 to 3 questions of 4 marks, so you can easily get 8 to 12 marks from this point. So it is very easy and easy to understand. You can also go to the W3 schools for the extra information about the trigger, and you can have your own notes on the trigger. Okay, so in this way we are concluding unit number 4, and last unit, that is unit number 5, that is more about a security in how to create a user. In next video lecture we are going to start a final unit, unit number 5. Till then, stay at home, stay safe, stay healthy.